When I was listening Eric's talk about the grand societal experiments, I was thinking, what's going to happen in a developing country like China. So how do ideas, technology, regulatory regimes travel? From Gabriel Tard's view, that is imitation. Gabriel Tard was a major figure of sociology. Time took the central stage and became the main president of the scientific discipline of the sociology. Tard was abandoned and was branded as the psychologism and superstitism. So since then, Tard has disappeared from the mainstream social theory until recently, when there has been a renewed interest in Tard, and Latour regard Gabriel Tard and the precursor of actor network theory. How can I just go? Sorry. So this paper studies China's imitation of a Western intellectual property regime. Conceptually, addition to a framework of STS, I find that Tard's work on laws of imitation is most interesting. I feel that which provides a very distinctive perspective to understand imitation that's taking place in a developing country like China. According to Tard, ontologically, the social plane is nothing but imitation. He sees that imitation is a fundamental social form and the practices, and only one mode of a universal activity. Of course, imitation will not be exact, it could be an innovative imitation or imitative innovation. And it is because of imitation is an action at a distance of one mind upon another. So for this paper, I will only focus on Tard's maxim. He said, imitation always occurs at an optical point where we are near enough to have all the illusion of the scenery, but without being near enough to be aware of the stage machinery. I really hooked with it and convinced that it can help me to explain why China look at China's. Actually, the first adoption it was the turn of the 20th century, when at the demand of the U.S. administration, the then Chinese Qing dynasty government was prompted to sign we call unfair treaty. Of commercial relations between the two countries. So that was the first time the protection and also the concept was used into China. So actually, which demanded that legal protection of Americans' copyright and trademarks, patents, right in China's territory, and in return, and offer China reciprocal protection of China. Because that time China had little to no IP ownership to be protected in the US. And as we said, China even did not have this concept of the IP. But since then, the different IP laws and laws promulgated in China until 2014, of the Chinese, the People's Republic of China. And during the socialist regime, that all the laws were repealed and the installed IP system was eradicated completely. But it was after the start of the economic reform, especially in the running up to China's entry into WTO, that adoption of the Western intellectual property regime was again put on the table. However, from mid-80s to now, the outcomes are quite paradoxical. On the one hand, we see that, look at the statistics, and it suggests that China has now become the largest IP, has the largest IP system in the world, and also is the #1 IP producer worldwide. The patent application, it's already reached 2 million in 2015. That's only 1 year. And a total of 1.7 million valid patents had been granted during 2015. So one thing I need to point out that actually 87% of granted patents are indigenous patents. So, and in the U.S., the U.S. patents or European patents or the rest of the patents only hold a quite small part. But on the other hand, China has been frequently criticized by its trading partners, the governments, for being the source of pirated, counterfeiting commercial goods. And China has been placed on the U.S. government's special 301 watch list for many, many years. In 2015, it still remains on the priority watch list. Actually have a series other lists, notorious country lists and priority foreign country, the watch list. So the question is, how do we interpret such a paradoxical phenomenon? There has been a range of polarized accounts about China's achievement, or its achievement or failure in adopting Western IP regime, and certainly a failure to develop an effective analysis of China's ongoing imitation of Western IP regime. And there are numerous theoretical frameworks that were applied to this phenomenon has unfortunately failed and led to endless debates. And people are not sure whether China should copy Western regime, because believe that Chinese tradition did not really have the similar conception. Also, Chinese society and the culture believe that the share of the knowledge is very important for development. And also some believe that the reason is the Chinese government has been resistant to complying with the WTO's IP protection regime. But the findings from my own studies show that the Chinese government in a century ago or now actually is determined. They are very keen to imitate the West. So for this study, and the paper is only touch upon a very small part of the TARD theory, the law of the imitation. This paper mainly is focusing on the type of imitations orchestrated by states and international organizations. And I borrow TARD's concepts, namely optical point, illusion, scenery, but I break down these to a different sub-concepts. So I called the stage props. So the analytical focus is mainly at the state level, using China's imitation of a Western IP regime as the case study. And I called Global North as a donor and China as the imitator. And using TARD to look into the starting point of the imitation program, that we see there is, the urge as on both sides, and just as described as by TARD's imitation at optical point, the urge are quite different, in the north, and there is a demand for global harmonization of the Western IP regime. And this came from the geographical shift in the location of the manufacturing from developed to developing countries. So most manufacturing industries are outsourced. What have been left in the global north are the intellectual minds of design, R&D, so-called knowledge economy. In such an economy of global labor division, of course, IP protection is extremely important for the global north. And for developing countries, actually developing countries are all, like China, is very keen to join WTO. And the reason is very obvious, because joining WTO, they can attract the FDI and investment technology. And so for the same reason, the Chinese government actually has been determined to imitate the West. The reason, the purpose is to build technological capabilities. So like TARD said, this is the optical point, and the players actually embarked on the course of imitation, but the donor did not fully understand what China was up to, and do not really fully understand its context. And for the imitator, China, and do not know what Western IP regime would bring to China. So I'll look at these, the illusions these both sides have created to see. These are all based on their own perspectives. And the perceptions, expectations, and the motives, and the perceptions always selected, we all know. And also we live in the world of objects, and that surrounds us and always reminds us and linked to us about the various experiences that we have had, and also of the motives that we have in relation to it. So it's clearly there is a discrepancy, between the illusions between the donor and the imitator. So if we look at the differences For the Chinese government, they do not have a prior tangible knowledge of operating such a system. So their expectations based on the best practice that was provided by the counterpart in the global north. And also they have experienced the worst experience in dealing with the IP owners from the north. So we know because China become the world's manufacturing site, and they produce goods of which technology designed elsewhere. And for every piece of the goods China produces, it has to pay royalty fees or license fees. This is disproportionately high relating to their income generated to them. So for that, of course, they have their perception, their expectation. They have and also put under the strong desire to be like the North. They imagine that it will be really good with this IP system installed in China. Will bring China to the innovative, to lead China to the innovative nation. But for the government from the North, of course, they see the best practice of the home IP system in the past, and they use that as an example for China. And they expect when the same system to be transported into China, it will operate the same manner. And their design is for the same protection of IP, their IP in Chinese territory. But although they have different illusions, but need to for them to work together, they need to create the common grounds, and both sides need to have a set of tangible objects that both donor and imitator agree to work on. And the other things is the statistics, and a statistic can be used as evidences, not only for donor, also for imitator. By looking at the media publicity and the government reports, that I could see that both imitators and the government have been chasing the stage props. So if I list here, these tangible objects and statistics, but they all focus on something they want to see. For example, for the U.S. Government, their interest is the protection of U.S. IPs. So they are very much focusing on the enforcement mechanism. They complained about the Chinese criminal threshold is too high. So they convinced the Chinese government needs to change it. For example, from 4 years to the punishment need to be lengthened. So that's from the U.S. and also I see the EU counterpart. They are very interested in introduce China of the new system, the players, for example, collective society, which China didn't have, but China, they all, take on, and China in 2004, 2005, they established the 6 collective societies to collect these copyright royalties and the fees, but they run it as the business and generate high income, and they were really hated by the companies in there. And so, but it's interesting if you look at what China did. Of course, China they want to see that China, after installation of the Western IP regime, and China can benefit from that. And during the period of time in 2006, I think I should show you the statistics. So if you look at that, during the period of time from 1985 to 2004 or 2005, the Chinese own IP ownership is very low. So what the Chinese government, what their concern is the IP ownership. Because China didn't have that system, so there were not very many ownership at all at that time. So 2006, the Chinese government science and technology policy emphasized indigenous IP. That was criticized by the US government. But in 2008, that's very interesting, and the government, the State Council's documentation very clearly set out a plan, a very detailed strategy for incentivizing and supporting creation of indigenous intellectual property. So, which was placed on top of the agenda while continuing the effort to improve the IP protection regime in China. So it specifies that government's role in can use the fiscal and financial investment and the government's procurement and other industrial policy to promote and guide the creation of intellectual property in key industries and the technological fields, and support for utilizing IP in the market. So following this call, by the central government, many provincial government, municipal government, county government devised their own measures and methods to encourage creation of IP. So various measures included the monetary rewards to individuals or firms between the monetary amount is between 1,000 to several tens of thousands of the renminbi, the Chinese currency, for each patent granted by the SIPO. And also, if you do that, you will be awarded certification to provide honorable status or tax reduction to those firms. So since then, the growth of IP is just shoot up. If you go, no. But what we see actually, is the rapid increase of the Chinese IP policy. This is a policy induced. In reality, there were very low level of exploitation of the Chinese patents, and people criticize the government, the action, saying, it doesn't really generate economic gains. And given that, the U.S. government is really upset about this. They expressed very much concern about that patent thicket. They believe that will create blockage for U.S. innovation, their IP to enter Chinese market. So that is something what I think I want to say here. It's very interesting things, that make me think about what's going to happen. Actually, I have because I'm doing another research about digital copyright protection in China, in particular, when the large company involved in creative cultural industry, things really changed. Actually, lead to something I feel is uncharted water. Creates possibly a problem for the whole IP regime, because we see the the court, IP court in China couldn't really deal with these things. So you look at these numbers. How could they deal with these things? So it's lots of problems, but I should stop here. Thank you.